Thank you, Jerry. The scripture reading today is taken from Matthew chapter 5. If you'd like to take your Bibles and turn there, and we're going to read verse 9. Matthew chapter 5, verse 9. A very familiar text. And the Bible says, Matthew 5, verse 9, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." May the Lord add his blessing to the reading of his word today. And we're going to turn the time over to Dr. Phil Collins again at this time.
Good morning again. I'm sorry. Good afternoon. I will try to be efficient with your time. The reason I chose that text was it doesn't sound like very much of a health verse, does it? But the dichotomy that I find in myself and in most people I deal with health is they don't have peace. And peace comes from knowing the right thing to do and doing the right thing. Amen. The closer your health knowledge matches with your health activities, the more peace you're going to have in your heart. And God calls you something really special, doesn't He? He says, those people are my children. And that applies spiritually and applies physically. Most people I speak with know more to do or more of taking better care of themselves than what they do. So if you want peace in your life, you get those two, by God's grace, lined up together. You know, you can argue with yourself, you can argue with your doctor, but don't argue with God. Proteins that heal. After my first lecture, you're probably wondering if you should eat anything, right? Well, good thing that wasn't my only lecture today, because there's such an abundance of what God has given that we will never run short. In fact, I find that vegetarians have a much broader repertoire than non-vegetarians in general. Proteins that heal by Goethe. We are best at hiding those things that are in plain sight. Most of what I'm telling you has been right before you the whole time. Except we don't read it correctly, and therefore we come up with the wrong assumption. Most people have poor health because they have poor beliefs. They have beliefs like, I can't lose weight. Or they believe that I don't have time to exercise. Or I definitely don't have time to sleep. Or I've got to do this. Let me take you back 100 years. 100 years ago, you had no car, you had no wash machine, you definitely didn't have any of these computers that give me an extra pound of stress a day, huh? Not every day. If you go back, you would have spent probably between 30 to 40% of your day taking care of food supply. Everything from storage, to cooking, to growing, to picking, the whole thing. Most of you today spend less than 10% of either your time or your income on food. So what do you do with the other 20 or 30% of your time that you're not using just to get food? You sit down and you relax and take it easy, right? Or because your car can take you to town in 20 minutes, and the horse would be an all-day occasion, you'd go to town, and if you stayed too late, you'd come back on the horse and buggy the next day. But now you go to town and you come back within 2 hours. What are you doing with that extra 8 hours you saved? Do you see what's happening to our culture? All those time-saving things that we call time-saving devices, like your wash machine or your microwave or whatever you're doing, All those, quote, time-saving devices, you've saved all this time. Now you're taking your time off? Are you relaxing every day? No, we find 18 other things to do. So what we've done with all our technology is we've made it push us further and faster, and we're in poorer health because of it. And we assume because I don't have to work as hard or because I don't have to wash dishes, I've got it made. No, you really don't have it made. We're in poor health compared to our forefathers. And it's kind of a lie when they tell us we're living longer. Did you notice the dates in that book this morning on Fanny Crosby? Fanny Crosby was blind, but then the second verse in her song we sang this morning, she talked about seeing things. I'm saying, isn't it incredible that a blind lady writes a song about her vision and what she's seeing in heaven? Obviously, she's seeing it, maybe even clearer than you and I can. But did you notice the date when she was born? 1820. Did you notice the date that she deceased? 1915. Have you done your math yet? 95 years. I'm not sure that we're living longer, are you? But when you save one baby, and I'm all for saving babies, you get the lifetime of an adult. So in Ellen White's day, and in Fanny Crosby's day in 1820, 1830, we were losing 10, as much as 15% of our children. And so you save one child and you, what we call, skew the whole statistical. No, we're not living longer. In fact, we can improve that now. It's turned to the point where the generation that is presently growing up is said that will not live as long as you. We've gone over the hill. Our lifespans are actually shortening. Nothing is so hidden as the untold story of protein. Most people in America believe that protein is good and that the more you get, the better off you are. In fact, they even try to get more. Now they're buying protein drinks and protein shakes and protein whey protein, and we're putting it in this and putting it in that, and you've got to have your protein drink, and what did you have for breakfast? Well, you had a protein bar or a I'm going, wait a minute, folks. Have you ever considered that you may have excessive protein? Protein questions. What are the good sources? We're going to look at these. How much? Animal versus plant. The quality. Supplements, best sources, impact on diabetes. Dr. Campbell, the researcher, Colin Campbell, the researcher for the China study that he's best known for, started out in his younger years working as a food scientist, and his goal was the same as most food scientists. How can I help with world hunger? And his help with world hunger, he was convinced that if we could feed enough people the right amount of protein, we would take care of disease and we would take care of hunger. So what I have here, the global effort to stop world hunger in the 60s and 70s, governments and universities, malnutrition was due to a lack of protein. Well, malnutrition wasn't due to a lack of protein. They missed their point. Because about 30, maybe 35 years ago now, most of you remember seeing some of these pictures of when we had a major famine in Ethiopia. And we'd see those children with those large swollen abdomens, and they looked very fat. That wasn't fat, that was fluid, that was ascites. Their bloodstream, because of the low protein, was just leaking fluid out into the tissue. And so they said, if we could only get those children enough protein. Well, that's partially true, but the real fact was if we could get those children enough food. If they had nothing but rice to eat, they wouldn't look like that. Dr. Campbell was confused here, and you'll see how the story goes on. He spent 10 years in the Philippines. When he was in the Philippines, working for the International Development Agency, what he was doing was how to get more protein to the children. One of the coastal reasons he didn't have a lot of trouble, because he could just obviously give them more fish. But the problem is, how do I get fish to be stored in a hot climate inland? Well, it obviously wasn't working out. The fish wouldn't last that many days, they couldn't store it, they didn't have refrigeration, and so he turned to peanuts as a crop. So they'd raise peanuts, but in a hot, humid climate like the Philippines, you've got another problem. Peanuts can mold, and that mold is called an aflatoxin, and aflatoxins are carcinogenic, cancer-causing to the liver. So what do? The peanuts often contain the aflatoxin, carcinogen from mold, So he had a dual problem, how to produce more and how to prevent the aflatoxin. But during this time, Dr. Campbell, as a good scientist, was reading, obviously, his research. And he found some research that came out of India showing that people in the poor countries that had a lot of cancer, but where was the cancer? They found the cancer in the part of the population who was the wealthy part of the people in poor nations like Africa and India. This particular research came from Africa, and they demonstrated that the higher the socioeconomic status, the more money the person had, the more likely they were going to have liver cancer. And they went, huh, isn't that amazing? I'm trying to feed all these kids more protein, and I'm trying to increase protein for the whole population. And this article, this research is coming out saying that the people on the high protein diets have more cancer. For a researcher, that's like a slap in the face. Here he is trying to develop something. So he goes on. He says the worldwide liver cancer rates were highest in the countries with the lowest protein intakes. Now wait a minute. Where were they at? Believed to be caused by a protein deficiency. That's what the common belief was in the 1960s and 1970s. And he, as a researcher, bought that. But it goes on. He found that the highest amount of cancer was highest among the wealthy families who were able to get 20% of their protein intake or more. So there was no doubt that there was cancer in these countries. The question is, what was causing it? Here's one answer already. A report from India that I was telling you about came in from research. People with the highest protein intake had the highest cancer rates. So protein wasn't the answer. In fact, protein was a causative agent. People with the lowest protein intake had no liver cancer. That's interesting research. I thought those were the ones that were starving to death. I thought those poor peasants that lived down the valley that had to eat beans and rice, and the king in his castle who got steak every night would have it made. You read some of the old English history, and I'm not sure which Henry it was, but one of them had gout so bad that they had to lift him up, pull the horse underneath him, let him down on the horse so he could even ride. He was so crippled up he couldn't even get on an animal. And they thought he had it made. And the peasant that worked hard for him all day didn't have gout and didn't have a problem. So nothing wrong with beans and rice, folks. Dr. Colin Campbell's mother-in-law died of cancer, changed his whole career. He was getting this information, keep coming in, keep coming in, keep coming in. And at this point, he obviously changed his career to look at what am I doing? What is the cause? So he studied the area of nutrition and cancer. This is all before he even got to the China study that he's obviously famous for. Went home from the Philippines to Cornell University, and he wanted to test his observations. Can I prove this in a laboratory model? And of course, he uses the rat model to try to prove this. Dr. Chen was the collaborating scientist there in China that developed what he called a cancer atlas. Looked at various counties all over China and found as much as 100, 150% difference between this county and this county depending on their death rate. Now, why was China so important? There was many people in China who have lived all their days within a 50-mile radius. We almost can't think of that in America. I mean, I moved that far almost before I was born. Maybe many of you did too. Can you imagine living within 50 miles of where you're born your whole life? That's it. Well, that's a lot of Chinese. And what does that do for research? That means the food they eat comes from right where they live. So you can connect a nutritional deficiency, whatever they have in that area, with disease process. That's why the China study is so significant. And of course, he had over 500,000, 650,000 participants. But back to Dr. Campbell again. The China study between Dr. Campbell and the Chinese, obviously Dr. Chen, looked at a few opportunities. Like we said, they lived within a 50-mile radius, they ate their food that was grown there, and the disease rates varied by as much as 100 times between one county to the other. So if I had 100 people in this county with prostate cancer and only had one over in this county with prostate cancer, what am I going to look for? What are these people doing wrong? What nutrients don't they get? And what nutrients are they getting excessive amounts of? See, it's a two-sided situation. Collected 1,000 pieces of information from each of the individuals, and of course, you've read the book. The book finally came out in 2006. China Study was back in the 80s. 83 was China Study 1. 87 was China Study 2. Didn't come out until 2006, and that's what most of you are familiar with. And of course, if you go on your computer and look this up, you're going to have people saying all kinds of things about Dr. Campbell. And that's a good sign that he's right. Because if you have to debunk the man or say he's not a good researcher, or he's fool or whatever, you probably are working for the meat industry or somebody else. I don't know who you're working for, but you're not working for good science. So here's the key. Laboratory rats, this is Dr. Campbell's research here, reported in the China Study book, laboratory rats with different protein amounts. So he gave various amounts of protein in their rat chow. A rat on 5% protein had the low rate of cancer growth. Adjusting for protein here. Rats on 20% protein had a high rate of cancer growth. So he was proving in a laboratory model what they were finding with humans in these countries. So far, so good. Let's go on. What he did is he says, okay, we're going to infect these animals with cancer and see what we get. So, two groups of laboratory rats. One group was injected with a high dose of a carcinogen. Can you guess what that carcinogen was? Peanut aflatoxin. He was being consistent with what he found there in the Philippines. So he injected these rats with a carcinogen, had to be an aflatoxin, and he fed them a low protein diet. So high injection, large quantity of cancer-causing agent, a low protein diet, and they developed a low response to cancer. Some of them did develop cancer. Look at the second group of rats. Injected a low dose of carcinogen, fed them a high protein diet, and they developed a higher response to cancer, even with a low dose of carcinogen. So here's a take-home message. One thing we can learn right now is that if you will eat a low protein but adequate protein diet, and we'll go over what that is, you, even in a polluted environment, even with cancer-causing agents, have reduced your risk of cancer significantly. And all this time, we want to feed you more protein. Protein is what makes your DNA. Protein is what makes your hormones. Protein is what makes your enzymes. With all that said, it's absolutely essential. But excessive amounts of it can make you much more susceptible to abnormal growth. And a young man says, well, that's what I want. I want bigger muscles. Well, I understand that. But bigger muscles doesn't always mean good health. So, next thing, Dr. Campbell says, what would be the ideal quantity of protein to feed people? Well, once again, we're still back here on a rat study. This is not a human study. We're still back working on rats. And what he's saying here is foci development. Now, foci is another word for saying how many tumors did this person have? Well, rats. So, he started out. Once again, when you're working with rats, you give them adequate protein till they become an adult rat, probably at the age of 3-4 months. And then you reduce their protein intake accordingly as you go along. Now, research that's not Dr. Campbell's, but research on longevity even gets more interesting. You can take a laboratory rat, adjust their protein level, and the typical rat lives about 900 days, a little bit less than 3 years. Or you can adjust their protein level and you have that rat live for 1,800 days. You can double the lifespan of a rat by adjusting their protein in their menu. First, you get them to be an adult because you have to have a certain amount of protein to develop your height and your weight, etc. And then from there on out, you can adjust it. So Dr. Campbell here is obviously working not with a baby rat. He's working with adult rats to deal with this. He gave one group 4% and checked their cancer rate. Well, the 4% group was minimal cancer rate. He gave 6% protein, still very low. He gave 8% protein to another group, and it went up a little bit, and he gave 10% protein to another group. Not until he get to 12% did he have a jumped, and then between 12 and 14%, he had another 2.5. And at 20% protein, about 85% of all his animals developed cancer. 85% of the rats developed cancer, whereas on a 4% diet, maybe 3% did. That really got his attention, got my attention too. He is setting it higher than what I would. Adequate protein for body growth. He's setting it 10%. We know from other research that humans research do very well at 8%. Now, I don't want the minimal standard, I want the best standard. But when it comes to protein intake, somewhere between 8 to 10% is plenty. Guess how much protein is in broccoli per calorie? This is going to totally shock you, but it's going to prove my point. Broccoli is 45% protein by calorie. I'm not telling you not to eat broccoli because it's 45% of the calories, but how many bushels of broccoli would you have to eat a day to get the quantity you need? So don't skip the broccoli. Enjoy your broccoli. But I want to prove to you a point. And the question is, if you will relate to the cow, we'll have it all taken care of. I could bring a cow and stand it here this morning and say, my example, follow her around and she'll answer all your questions without saying anything but moo. What does she answer? What does the cow eat? Protein, right? Yeah, grass. Okay, and it builds an animal this big. It gains more weight, enough to make it profitable, right? It puts off white milk, and in the end, it makes a steak. Where'd all that protein come from? From grass. My case arrested. If you want to be healthy, eat grass. But I prefer to eat my kind of grass. I like my greens, I like my broccoli, I like my Brussels sprouts, I like my asparagus, etc. That's the whole point. And it's that simple. And cows have been standing before you all the days of your life. Is that not correct? Then why didn't you figure it out? That's why I'm saying, if you want to hide a truth, like that first statement by Goethe, if you want to hide a truth, hide it in plain sight. The cow has been there all my life. And I didn't figure it out. It didn't take Campbell. It didn't take research from China. It didn't take going halfway around the world, because you've got plenty of cows around here. Is that correct? So go look at a cow. Learn from the cow. It's that simple. The farmer isn't out there passing out protein pills and giving protein shakes to good old Betsy. Biology of proteins, very, very significant. We're not talking about environmental impact. We're talking about biology of protein. If we're talking about environmental impact, do you know how much protein you've got to feed a cow to get 1 pound of protein yield out? They're an extremely inefficient animal. If you just take the protein that you give an animal, whether feedlot animal, whatever you're doing, and feed it directly to humans, we'd be so far ahead. See, we don't have a world hunger problem. We have an appetite problem. If everyone in this world would commit that they do not have to eat animals, do you realize what we'd have? We'd have so much food we wouldn't know what to do with it. Almost every soybean and every corn plant that I saw riding here to church this morning is going to be fed to hogs, is going to be fed to cows, beef cattle mostly, and what's it going to do? It's going to not feed how many people? For every 1 cow it feeds, I could feed probably 100 people. It's not that hard, folks. This is really simple stuff. What's that?
You have an awful lot of farmland. You didn't have all that pasture around.
Well, what if they put it in food? That's, I mean, incredible. Do you realize that right now in America, if we would use our crops for food as compared with animals for food, that we could feed America and probably 1/3 of the world. That's how blessed we are in this country. We are that blessed. Animal protein, increased intake, increased disease. It's just the common denominator. I'm convinced that humans were never made to eat animals. And when I look at their teeth, when I look at their digestive system, we talked about the small and large intestine this morning. These intestines aren't made to handle meat. Now you look at a dog, you can almost draw a line from his mouth to the other end, and that's his intestine. It's a straight pipe. He can handle a low fiber diet, he can handle carcinogens, and he can pass them through like a freight train. And if you don't believe me, just give him more food and you'll see what he does. You take a human, we have 25 feet from one end to the other. It is made to process things much more slowly, much more lower in as far as nutrient concentration. It takes a while to get it digested. We were never made to do this. It's high in saturated fat, and the high saturated fat content tends to cause problems for humans because it is an irritant to your vessels and increase your risk of diabetes. And guess what the highest saturated fat is that we humans have gotten hung up on the last 10 years? Coconut oil. Everybody goes, you write a book about coconut oil and everyone flocks to the store and buys coconut. They don't ask the right question. Is this going to cause cancer? Is it going to cause heart disease? What changed? When I went through school, back in the 70s, if you can believe it, guess what coconut oil was? A no-no. Why are you causing heart disease? Why are you increasing cholesterol level? We called it tropical oils. Palm and coconut oil are high in saturated fat. Now, I'm glad they aren't animal. They're less harmful because not being animal versus the cow. But as far as being healthy, put it on the outside. Eat the whole coconut if you feel you have to have coconut. And my advice is leave the coconut oil alone. No dietary fiber. Well, the fibers pass through the animal. The cow doesn't have fiber. Low in antioxidants and low in vitamins. The cow got the antioxidants and the cow got the vitamins. Not left for you. Plant-based proteins, increase intake, we get no disease. The low poly and mono unsaturated, these are unsaturated fats, they're high in the plant. They're high in fiber, they're high in antioxidants, and they're high in vitamin. The choice is that simple. But when you're raised on cow milk and cow steak and cow cheese and cow sour cream and cow butter, I almost sound like I'm a lunatic. And I was raised on a small farm. I know what it means to milk a cow. I know what it means to have a wet tail wrapped around your neck. Part of growing up. At the same time, I realize it's not the best fuel for my body. Examples of diseases related to high protein intake: cancers, ovarian, colon, and prostate are due to high animal intake. We could add liver on that from Dr. Campbell's research. Cardiovascular disease. We're going to go through these a little more specific. Osteoporosis. We still have people, it is so amazing. We still have doctors advising ladies, well, men too, but ladies more because they don't start out with much bone. They usually have more bone problems before we men. We men need to get to about 80 before we start wearing out of our bones. Ladies get about 50. Osteoporosis, we still have doctors recommending that they use dairy products. They still recommend drinking milk to get their calcium. I'm going, what's the disconnect here? Because the higher the protein, the more calcium you lose from your bones, not get to your bones. If drinking milk or taking calcium tablets, like most people do, a cheap calcium, if that cured osteoporosis, why is it getting worse every year? Why does the percentage keep going up? Diabetes, we'll talk about that. High blood pressure, dementia, that gets people's attention. High protein, think of it this way. If protein is the stuff that makes you grow quick, mature more rapidly, get a few more wrinkles and a few more gray hair, I'm getting my share, then why would I want to be on a high protein diet at my age? When I was 14, I wanted my driver's license. Those 2 years just couldn't go quick enough. I need to mature. But most of us sitting here now aren't trying to mature more quickly, at least not physically. Some of us hopefully will grow up. But the point is, protein causes you to mature more rapidly. Now, maturing sounds good. How about going senile more rapidly? That doesn't sound good at all. Your brain actually has abnormal. What is Alzheimer's disease? When you actually dissect the brain, what is Alzheimer's disease? Guess what we find? We find a cluster, of abnormal protein, and that's how we diagnose it. A prion disease, people call it mad cow. When we dissect the brain in the human, what do we find? Abnormal protein. Does it make any sense? I mean, it's incredible. And of course, this is Dr. Campbell here, 8,000 associations between lifestyle, diet, and disease. I don't know why he said it at 8,000. He could have made it 10,000. I mean, it's just that pervasive. Lifestyle, disease. Lifestyle, disease. You are what you eat. Effect on high protein on coronary blood flow. This is your heart artery, obviously. And the amount of blood flow through those arteries determine whether I'm having chest pain and an angina or whether I'm ready to go out and walk 5 miles. Look what a high protein diet does. High protein diets on coronary artery flow. This one here is called a whole food, plant-based diet. Whole food means when you eat a tomato, you slice it and you eat it. That's eating the whole food. So a whole food, plant-based, that the protein had a 40% increase in blood flow in their coronary arteries. A person who walks in my office with angina, and I'm worried about if they're going to see him again in 2 weeks, and I put them on a plant-based diet, and the first goal is to get them free of pain. Pretty basic goal. Like to get up in the morning and not hurt. Walk across the bedroom and not hurt. Walk up steps and not hurt. That's this group here. Within 2 to 4 weeks, they should be out of pain. If you're not doing something right, or they're telling you a story. The group on the low-carb, high-protein diet. Anybody heard of that one? It's called Dr. Atkins. It's called the high-protein drinks. Low-carb, high-protein diet decreases, this is a minus here, decreases blood flow in the coronary arteries by 40%. That's called heart attack. Do you know what Dr. Atkins died from? I hope that it wasn't due to his own diet. This is from Fleming. Look at the journal. Angiology, vessel diseases, or vessel study, 2000. This is in medical. What you're seeing me is quoting medical journals. Your doctor has access to this information. How many of your doctors had told you to get off meat and get on dietary plant-based protein? Why aren't they reading their journals? Dr. Longo, PhD, University of California, Davis. School of Gerontology, so we're looking at folks who are getting old like me. Cell Metabolism, Volume 19, March of 2014. Pretty fresh stuff. Look what he found out. It is known consumption of animal protein increase insulin-like growth factor 1. Now, what does that mean? Insulin-like growth factor is called insulin-like because it acts obviously like insulin. Insulin causes a few things in your body. It causes rapid growth, and it causes your the sugar to be taken from your bloodstream and stored. So insulin-like growth factor causes tissue to grow. Well, what has that got to do with diabetes and cancer? Well, cancer is simple. Cancer is obviously an abnormal tissue growth. It's being overstimulated. Diabetes, in this situation, is it's causing the tissue to grow because of excessive storage. I'm eating too much and the body has to store it. And then down here, eating less animal protein lowers IGF-1 in the body. So Dr. Longo's research showed that if I'm eating less animal protein, I have less of this component that causes an increase of diabetes and cancer. Anybody interested in having less IGF? Now here's the hard news. IGF is not only found in animal. Using milk, as in cow's milk for our comparison, we're going to call that equal to 1 factor in the IGF. Using soy protein isolate, we've talked about this before here. Soy protein isolate is a factor of 2. Soy protein isolate in your soy foods, your smart foods they call them, which they shouldn't be called smart, you can use another adjective if you want, causes twice the amount of stimulation on your tissue as cow's milk. And people that will never think of drinking cow's milk will eat their smart dogs. Please read your package. If it says soy protein isolate or soy protein concentrate, leave it in the store. I'm not talking about soy milk. I'm not talking about tofu. I'm not talking about your edamames, your soybeans. I'm not talking about any of that. Read the ingredients. They have concentrated the soy to give soy a black eye. And that's where you read some headlines where soy causes breast cancer. No, it doesn't. Man messed up soy causes breast cancer. Let's get it straight. Soy is a good protein. You don't need a lot of it, but it is a good protein. If we look at this C-peptide, we'll go through this quickly. On a high vitamin D diet and a low vitamin D diet, vitamin D improves your immune response. And so if we look at the ratio between the IGF, the insulin-like growth factor, and they've got a C-peptide. C-peptide is a insulin response to the body. So if you have a lot of C-peptide, you're producing a lot of insulin in the body is really what it means. So if you have high insulin, and if you have high IGF, and you have high vitamin D, if you have low insulin and low IGF, and your vitamin D is high, they set your ratio to 1. A person with a high ratio but didn't have as much insulin, a little bit higher, you go across here, and the take-home message from this slide is that with high vitamin D, even when your ratio of the insulin-like growth factor is up and you have too much insulin, it's at 1.42. If you go over here with low vitamin D, you can have a high ratio and you have almost 2.25, 2.25 times the death rate. What's the take-home message? Well, most people read this slide and what do they do? They go buy a bottle of vitamin D and take it. That's not what the slide is for. The slide really says that even if you do take a high vitamin D level and you have a good blood level, you're still much higher than what you should be. And people on low vitamin D have more cancer because the vitamin D actually helps them to compensate for their rotten diet. No, change your diet. If you still need some vitamin D, please take it. But don't take supplements to make up for your bad diet. It's like taking insulin because you eat chocolate cake. No, the cake is off limits. You just don't go home and take a bigger shot. Do not use your supplements to make up for your bad lifestyle. That's what that chart should say. A different way of saying it, you say it the same way, a little bit different research. If you're high on vitamin D, and the ratio is low on both of those, you have the best case. These are the group in low vitamin D. We see them having higher colon rectal cancer. This is specific for here. Comparison of proteins. This research got really interesting. This is still by Dr. Longo. And here's what came out, and it threw me for a while until I saw the whole paper. Look at this. High protein diet, greater than 20% of your calories, a 74% increase in overall death rate, mortality, in 50 to 65-year-old age group. You go, well, I definitely don't want to eat high protein because I like to stay around a little longer. But then look at the second point. That's what really should get your attention. A 28% reduction in overall death rate in those over 65. You go, wow, of course. I'll wait till I'm 65 and eat all the protein I want. Well, that's what your leading articles came out, and they drew a line right here, and they didn't give you any other information. The headlines were, older people need more protein to reduce their risk of mortality, all causes. Of course, diet and heart disease, your biggest one. Is that the real story? No. Look, same researcher said this group, a high protein group, had fourfold, that's 400%, increased risk of dying from cancer. And they had a fivefold, that would be equivalent to 500% increased risk of dying from diabetes. So you see my point. You want a 28% possible benefit for a 400% or 500% loss. No, it was bad to start with in the way they reported it. Moderate protein, 10 to 20%, and a low protein diet obviously did the best. Now here's the interesting thing. I'm not recommending that you eat plant proteins so you can be on a high protein diet, but this is also true. The relationship to disease and protein intake disappeared if the patient was only eating plant proteins. If you're going to mess up on eating too much protein, please do it on turning yourself green with broccoli or soybeans. Do not consider even the animal base. Take-home message, obviously less than 10% of your calories from animal protein. How about 0? Average American eats twice as much animal protein. Get more of your proteins from your plant, nuts, seeds, etc. Another study from Diabetes Care, European Perspective Investigation of Cancer, 38,000 participants. Here's what they found. For every 5% calories consumed from animal protein was a corresponding 30% increase in the risk of diabetes. 5% increase here, I get a 30% here. Right now, cancer has outrun heart disease in most states. I didn't check on Ohio. In North Carolina, it outran heart disease in the past year. So cancer is our #1 killer in North Carolina. It's not going to be there long. Heart disease had a 30-year or probably a 40-year lifespan of holding that place. Cancer is not going to hold it very long. Not because cancer isn't devastating, but because diabetes right now in America is going to be our #1 problem, and I don't think it's going to take 5 years. We'll talk more about that this afternoon maybe. Adventist study, this is Adventist study 2, meaning this was the one they did just questionnaires on, and they're following people up with questions. 60,000 participants, and it says, okay, what diet group has the most amount of diabetes? Well, we got the vegans here. They've got the least, a little bit less than 3%. The lacto-ovo, they run over 3. The pesco, you know, when I ask people if they're a vegetarian, they say yes, but I eat fish. I'm going, okay, there must have been a vegetarian fish. No. The point is that they put that in their category. You know, or if you go to a restaurant and you say, I'm a vegetarian, what do you have on the menu that I can eat? And then they start saying, I've got fish. I'm going, you know, if it's got a mother or a face, it probably isn't a plant. Semi-vegetarian, I'll let you try to define what that is. And SAD, Standard American Diet, you can see that their prevalence is more than twice of this, just in the same group. And this is not a group of diabetics. This is categorizing people by the diet they eat and then saying how many diabetics are in that group. That's what this is doing. Proteins that heal, vegetable proteins, diet rich in protein to calorie. Some vegetables are higher in protein, calories than steak. Not that we're trying to engorge people on broccoli, but cabbage is a good second. The whole food, plant-based diet will give most people between 60 to 80 grams of protein a day. But did you look at what the requirement was? Here's how simple it is. And people are so worried about getting their protein. If you eat food that is not messed up by man, you can't, it is impossible to be on a low protein diet. It just does not exist. If you ate nothing but fruit, you'd get close to being on a low protein diet. You'd have to be a fruitarian. Apples, peaches, and pears, that'd be about it. And you'd probably get bored enough, you may eat some broccoli. Look at the requirement. Daily requirement for adults, 20 to 35 grams a day. So the people that are on a total, what they're going to call vegans here, even vegans get much more protein than even what their body needs in our country. The only way you cut this group down on their protein is you feed them half as much. And that's why a lot of people around the world are on a high protein diet. They don't have enough food. They only get 1 bowl of rice a day when we would like that for each meal. That's why they get less protein, not because that the food is bad. Rich in micronutrients. Here's the Chinese basic 4. You've heard of the American basic 4. You know what our basic 4 is here in America? Dairy is a group. Can you believe that? That's a whole group, just dairy. Another one of our basic 4, guess what another group is? Meat is a whole other group. So half of our diet that they're recommending to get your basic 4 in America is off the list for me. And then the third group in America is you got your fruits and vegetables, and of course you got your legumes and your nuts, etc. Let's look at Chinese. Okay, not all Chinese are vegetarians, but you know that most people in the world are not vegetarian by choice. They either can't afford it, or they, just don't have it available. Green leafy vegetables. Now grams, this is in grams, so 500 grams is a little more than a pound, 454 grams per pound. There's a little bit over a pound of green leafy vegetables. Can you imagine eating that every day? I won't ask the younger folks here with us. They get 5 grams of protein. Soybean products, they eat about 2 ounces a day of soybean products. They get 18 grams of protein. They eat sweet potatoes. Those are low protein food. They get about 400 grams, a little bit less than a pound. That gives them 8 grams of protein. And their cereals, rice, probably dominant grain, 400 grams, a little bit less than a pound of rice a day, and they get 40 grams in that. So their total protein intake is 71 grams per day, and they need 35. I'm not worried about the Chinese. I'm worried about when they don't have enough food, but if they have enough of their basic food supply, they do really well. Now, let's talk about Dr. Campbell's conclusion. I want you to hear it from the researcher himself, not from me. Talking about China, the difference between the China Study 1 and China Study 2 is China Study 1 was just in mainland China. China Study 2 was in mainland China and then over here looking at counties in Taiwan. Now what happened from mainland China to Taiwan? Well, Taiwanese have gotten more Americanized. And so they wanted to know if you take a Chinaman here who's been healthy and good food, longevity, and we put him over here and we Americanize him, does it happen the same thing that happened to you and me? I want you to hear Dr. Campbell's conclusion. It says plasma cholesterol. Many of you are concerned about your cholesterol level. In the 90 to 170 milligram per deciliter range is positively associated with most cancer mortality rates. Let me read that again. It's going to shock you because most of your cholesterol levels, you'd be glad to have it in this range. But look at what he found out from China. It said plasma cholesterol levels in the 90 to 170 range. This is total cholesterol, folks. This isn't just your good cholesterol. Is positively associated with most cancer mortality rates. When it says positively associated, this means they see this person at this high gets cancer. Plasma cholesterol is positively associated with animal protein intake and inversely associated with plant. So the animal protein will make it go up. The vegetable protein will make it go down. Next category he wrote in. Breast cancer is associated with dietary fat, which is associated with animal protein intake. And inversely, with age of menarche, women who reach puberty at younger ages have greater risk. But what makes young girls develop quicker? You got my lecture. High protein diet. Not to count what we're doing now to our meat, stimulating hormones, etc. That's all moving down the road quicker. Let's go on. This is Dr. Campbell. Cardiovascular disease is associated with lower intakes of green vegetables and higher concentrations of ApoB form, that's your LDL, it's your bad cholesterol, he said here, so-called bad cholesterol, which is associated with increased intakes of animal protein and decreased intakes. It gets boring almost, do you know that? Every one I'm going to read to you, you know how it's going to come out already, don't you? But let's finish reading, because hopefully if we keep pounding away, it'll get through my head, and hopefully we'll all figure it out. Colon rectal cancers are considered inversely associated with intakes of 14 different dietary fiber fractions. If you want to avoid colon cancer, take care of your good bacteria that we had in our first lecture by eating proper fiber. Fiber, in this case, is more important than the food, but you can't get good food without good fiber. And stomach cancer is inversely associated with green vegetable intake and plasma concentrations of beta-carotene. Now, where do you get your beta-carotene from? Anything that's orange or yellow, carrots to squash. Here's his conclusion. I'm glad he wrote it because you'll think it was just from me. The conclusion is, number one, he lists 3 points. The greater variety of plant-based foods in the diet the greater the benefit. Variety ensures broader coverage of known, and here's an interesting one, unknown nutrients. He's assuming to find a few more that we need. We haven't got all the research in yet. So greater variety of plant-based. So eating a wide variety ensures better nourishment. Because one plant may pull more boron out of the soil, this one may get more iodine out of the soil. This one may get more iron out of the soil, like your beet or your blueberry, and this one may get more chlorophyll, like your cabbage or your Swiss chard. Number two is point number two. Provided there is plant food of variety, quality, and quantity, a healthful, nutritionally complete diet can be attained without animal-based foods. Now you don't, see, that doesn't sound phenomenal, but from a researcher that started out in the 60s and 70s trying to get fish to the Philippines to writing this now is a significant jump. You've heard this all your life, that you can get an adequate diet from fruits, nuts, grains, and vegetables contain all the nutrients you're going to need. You've heard it because why? And it was written, guess when? Before any of us were born. You see, when God talks to a prophet, I recommend we listen. This is nothing new for you. But for Dr. Campbell, he thought he was on the edge of discovery. And I'm glad for him. Because many people will read China Study 2 and change their diet more than when they read the Little Red Book. It's a shame, but it's reality. The closer the food is to it, this is point number 3, the closer the food is to its native state, with minimal heating, salting, and processing, the greater will be the benefit. China Study, number 2, Dr. Campbell, and he gets all kinds of flack for what he says. But he's got the whole country of China to back up his mouth. We don't have a better product. We have Framingham Study in the United States, started in the 50s. We have Adventist Health Study, started in the 50s. Those are our big gold standards. And whenever I read about something, about how beneficial alcohol is, I'm going, isn't that interesting? Because the biggest and best studies tell me that it's damage to my brain and I'm not going to live as long. And you're trying to tell me to drink alcohol for my heart when I know it's a toxin. So you keep going back to the golden standard. The China Study is a golden standard. It is accurate. It is cause and effect. You do this, you get this. You do this, you get this. So, from taking care of your intestinal tract, like we started talking with, and taking care of your immune system, to what Dr. Campbell has to say, I'm hoping I've given you a few pointers for what you should have for lunch. And guess what? I took a peek at what's for lunch. And there's brown rice in there. And folks, if that's the only thing we had to eat, we'd be well nourished today if we had nothing else. I mean, not even anything to put on it. That's how good that one food is. And people around the world that are starving don't have enough of that good food, because if they did, they wouldn't be starving. Wow, what an incredible proof that we have in front of our eyes.